Stand up, Nuggets Nation. Denver Sports presents the Mile High Hoops podcast with Zach By. Denver Sports is your home for the most Nuggets content. Now here's your host, Zach By.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of the Mile High Hoops podcast. As always, I am your host, Zach By, and as always, I appreciate you spending a sliver of your busy day with me here on the podcast, reacting to the afterglow of Game 1 of the Nuggets first round series, a complete and utter blowout of the Minnesota Timberwolves. And I say afterglow because we did come in yesterday and record an audio-only version of this podcast and reacted to a lot of the nooks and crannies of my observations of the game. And today, I think we'll maybe keep it just a little bit more general and also talk about the landscape of just the NBA playoffs in general. Shout out to Superbook, proud sponsor of this podcast. And I'll say this, you know, when looking back at Game 1, I keep going back and forth between thinking that there's nothing that Minnesota can do from a counterpunch standpoint that could turn this series on its head. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be adjustments. There will be, and we'll wait to see what those are on Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. Is that game on TNT? Let's pull it up real quick here. Yes, it is, 8 o'clock on TNT. I go back and forth because I don't want to be a prisoner of the moment. I've done this for too long to overreact to Game 1, okay? Just simply have been caught in that trap too many times before, where you use the one game sample, the only game that we have to react to, as not a referendum, but just like a permanent framing of what the series is going to be. And we just know that that's not the case. But that being said, these two teams are just in different places as teams, as franchises, different places on the climb to get to where they currently are and where they ultimately want to be. One is a bona fide championship contender. The other is it'd be not fair to call the Timberwolves an upstart, but they're just at a different point in their journey. Like they added a new piece, a massive new piece year over year in Rudy Gobert that I just don't think is going to age well at all. I think that the Rudy Gobert trade in Minnesota from Tim Connelly could be the worst trade of the modern NBA era. 4 unprotected picks for a non-scoring aging center. It just doesn't make enough sense, and he's not even as impactful at a lot of the hallmark stuff that he used to do that will ultimately send him into the Hall of Fame. I mean, and that's not hyperbole. Rudy Gobert will be one day in the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts. This guy has won the Defensive Player of the Year 3 different times. 3 different times. That's some of the most in NBA history, quite literally. The guy's been an all-defensive team member, you know, feels like, you know, half a dozen times, quite literally, in addition to being an all-NBA player just in general, but it's not a good fit. And back to this series, like there will be adjustments made, and there just will be better play. Minnesota is not as bad as they were in Game 1. They were bad, and that's what it looks like. And I'm not putting I'm reducing Game 1's blowout down to Minnesota being bad, but when it looks that bad, and you lose by nearly 30 points on a night where the Nuggets don't even play that great offensively, I didn't think. Those are two energies coming together. The Nuggets looking like the contender that they are, and the Timberwolves being one of the worst versions of themselves. So, you know, I was watching a fight last week, and I've been following this boxer for a few years now. His name is Shakur Stevenson, and I believe he's from New Jersey, and he's a up-and-coming, just incredible boxer. He fought for Team USA in Beijing, I want to say. I think he's a Gold Glove guy. I think he got silver, the silver medal in those 2016 Summer Olympics, and he's phenomenal. He's terrific, and I watched him fight a couple weekends ago. And he's 20-0, by the way. And I watched him fight a couple weekends ago, and he fought this veteran boxer, and he certainly wasn't, a tomato can. He had a good career, by like round number 3 or 4, and Shakur Stevenson was a legitimate favorite, like the Nuggets are in this series, and it became abundantly clear in like the fifth round that there was no counterpunch from this opposing boxer. There just wasn't anything he could go to, and he would go to the corner, every few minutes after the round was over, and he'd be getting, new advice from his trainer, and hey, try this, and sure enough, he'd go out there and try to do it, and Shakur Stevenson would just tic-tac-toe, just point him to death, and I kind of see the same thing transpiring here in this series. There will be new advice from Chris Finch. There will be, okay? There will be adjustments made. But I just don't think ultimately that there's some new twist or tinker that will have Minnesota winning even 2 games in this series. Now, maybe they do. Maybe I end up being wrong about that. But let alone winning 4 of the next 6 games, it almost feels like an impossibility. And I hope I'm not getting ahead of myself saying that, but I think from a talent standpoint, the Nuggets have a serious advantage. From an experience standpoint, the Nuggets have a serious advantage. From a coaching standpoint, maybe they have an advantage in Michael Malone. I thought Michael Malone did mostly a good job on Sunday night, outside of putting Jokic back in a basketball game where you're up 30 points in the fourth quarter. That one's still, even 48 hours later, and even reacting yesterday, I don't have a reason for that. And actually, the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, because I was floating ideas and theories on the podcast yesterday of like, okay, what could it have been? Because I can't think of anything reasonable from a basketball standpoint why you would do that. Could it be that you wanted to just continue to build rhythm, I suppose? Because your guys had been sitting out, I guess that could be, but it just doesn't make basketball sense to me. Could Michael Malone just be that much of a nervous Nelly that he just, no lead is ever safe? It could be, but wisdom should be prevailing in that moment. The downside and risk of playing Jokic when he's already banged up, let's not forget that. He's already banged up. The downside of putting him in that moment. And Jokic clearly rejected the idea that he should be playing because he promptly got a flagrant foul and got himself fouled out. But the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, maybe it is legitimate, like, I get in professional wrestling, they call it heat. Like, is there heat between he and the Timberwolves? Is there friction between the Nuggets and the Timberwolves because of maybe a couple things? Chris Finch used to be an assistant coach for Michael Malone. I don't know what that relationship is like anymore. And also, the Tim Connolly jumping ship from the president of basketball operations to the president of the Timberwolves. Maybe there's something there, and maybe he's like trying to like ride for like his ownership group in the Kroenkes, who were clearly upset with Tim Connolly on the way out. And I think that's actually when I like kept on thinking about. I think that's a reasonable theory or hypothesis. It's an educated guess, but still a guess nonetheless. Maybe he just made a mistake. Maybe he just simply made a mistake and wasn't obsessive with the score in that moment. But whatever. I want to talk about, we talked about most of the guys yesterday and their performances individually. But I'm looking at these Western Conference playoffs, and who were the 1 or 2 teams that caused the most, let's say, fear? Because speaking for myself, I wasn't like fearing any of these opponents, but maybe trepidation. Who gave you the most pause? It was the reigning world champion, Golden State Warriors, and undoubtedly, even supplanting them as the number 1 team that give you pause, was the Phoenix Suns. And you look at Phoenix, they lose. They're in a hole. On their home court, they lose on Sunday to a team in the Clippers who I think have the best player in the series in Kawhi Leonard. I think they have the best depth in the series. They're certainly a deeper team post KD trade, and now they've lost home court advantage. And I this assumption that the Nuggets were going to play Phoenix in the second round, maybe we got ahead of ourselves. Now I don't know if I don't want to react to Game 1 too much either with that series, because by the time you're hearing this, the Suns could have tied the series, but they've already lost home court. So, we'll see how that ages. But I just find it interesting that there's assumptions made in sports, and for weeks I've been saying, well, the Nuggets are going to match up with Phoenix in the second round. Not so fast. Even without Paul George, this could be a very, very long series, and there's a couple guys over there with real injury history, Chris Paul, Kevin Durant. We don't know what this team's going to look like in 2.5 weeks. So I just think it's interesting that now the world champs are in a hole, down 2-0 to Sacramento. Okay, and the Suns are in a hole to Los Angeles, a team that the Nuggets have had real success against over the years. This could shape up to, especially if the Nuggets make this a short first-round series and get to rest, while the Clippers and Suns go 6 or 7, could be a real advantage and an incredible pathway to this team making their first ever NBA Finals. And that is the prospect of that is just hysterically fun. Will they have to play a team like the Lakers on their way? That may not be so fun, depending on who you ask, as that team looked really good this past weekend. On Monday evening, we did see the Kings prevail against Golden State in another fantastic game. By the way, these playoffs have just been great with a capital G so far. It has been great. I'm seeing the best of the NBA, and in a very roundabout way, it has me the contrast between what the regular season looked like this past year compared to what I'm seeing in the NBA playoffs, it almost makes me hate the regular season even more than I already did. In the load management era and all that the current NBA regular season stands for, and it doesn't feel like much these days. And then you get to the playoffs, and this is the best of the sport. I absolutely love it. Love it, love it, love it. We saw the Nets be more competitive on Monday night, but the Sixers ultimately prevailing. The Sixers are now up 2-0 in that series, and they win. The Sixers won 96-84 against Brooklyn. I just don't think Brooklyn has the firepower to compete with a team like Philly. Maxey was tremendous on Monday night, and they can hit you several different ways. So for Harden, who made 7 threes over the weekend, he only scores 8 points. Didn't need to do a whole heck of a lot. And well, I didn't need to. He tried and didn't, and they still had a double-digit victory. I think that's maybe my takeaway is that James Harden was terrible and didn't look prepared to play, and the Sixers somehow still win by double figures. So they're going to cruise through that series, I'm just assuming. Maybe the Nets can steal a game. I don't think they'll win 2. I think they steal one of the 2 in Brooklyn on a max effort, max focus type of response, game 3. But I don't think that series is going to go beyond 5. Going back to the Nuggets for just a second. Looking at defensively, if Denver can duplicate even 80% of what they did on Sunday evening, I don't think they're going to lose a game in the series. I don't. Offensively, they're just in a different stratosphere than Minnesota. And if they're, again, I don't expect them to duplicate that defensive performance, holding a team to 80 points for the first time since 2016. That's unrealistic and not sustainable. But if they can get to 80% of that defense, they were tremendous with closing the valve on Timberwolves drives. And the help that they got on the backside defensively was great. And then the insane closeouts on all the shooters and just shot opportunities that Minnesota had. Excuse me, man. You're not going to duplicate the result in terms of 80 points, but if you can give 80% of that effort, the Nuggets are going to be just fine and resting for a few days while their Western Conference foes do battle. So, okay, we're going to leave it there for now. A little short, abbreviated follow-up version of the podcast. If you missed the reaction episode following Game 1, that's at Denver Sports .com, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. Best way to support this podcast is give us 5 stars if you think we deserve it. Tell a friend. That's the best way that we can grow this thing is through the grassroots. And we're going to be reacting to every single game here throughout the playoffs the next morning right here on the Mile High Hoops podcast. So, guys, I hope you're enjoying these NBA playoffs as much as I am. And it's not going to be long because Wednesday night on TNT, not as late of a start, but the 8 p.m. start, TNT, Wednesday night, and whatever happens in Game 2 against the Minnesota Timberwolves, you can be sure we're going to be talking about it right here on the Mile High Hoops podcast.